Welcome back everybody to another Python Pandas tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to go over a few different ways that you can work with missing values. The first thing we did here is we imported Pandas and NumPy. For our first example we're going to use dataframe 1. Let's go ahead and take a look. Notice that we have 5 columns, A through E, and 5 rows, A through E. In this data frame, we have several NaN, not a number, missing values. Now, one of the first things you might want to do is count your missing values. So for our first example, we're going to use this syntax here. And this is going to give us a count of the values for each column. Notice that we reference dataframe 1, then the column. We use a dot, value counts, and inside the round brackets, we assign false to drop NA. So in this example, we're going to use column D, and that gives us 5 for the count of the NaN, not a number, missing values. Let's go ahead and use column B. So let's just change that D to a B. And you can see in B we have 2 NaNs, and then 1 each of 10, 20, 30. And we get those counts here. One more example. Let's try column C. Okay, so in column C we have 2 200s, 2 NaNs, and 1 400. And we get those counts here. Another way that you could count the NaNs uses this syntax. So notice that we reference dataframe 1, dot is NA, dot sum. And this is going to give us the count of the NaN values for each column. If we take a look, in column A we have 1, B we have 2, C we have 2, and D we have 5, and E we have none. And you'll notice we get all of those counts here. Let's go ahead and clear our console. For our next example, what we want to do is take this data frame here, and where there are NaN missing values, we want to fill those in with a 0 or the word missing. Let's go ahead and take a look. So here's our data frame 2. Now one way we can fill those in is to use fill NA. We've gone ahead and assigned this to a new variable titled dataframe2 fill NA. Now in this case, wherever you see an NaN, those will now be filled in with zeros. So if we copy this and paste it, here we have basically the same data frame as we have here. However, as you can see, where there were NaNs here, those have been filled in with zeros here. Now, instead of 0, we could also put in the string missing. So let's just put that in here and take a look. Okay? So you can see in this data frame where there were zeros here, we have filled that in with the string missing. Next up, let's go over an example where we take a data frame and re-index it with some new dates. So here we have our original data frame 3. Let's take a look. Notice that we have our dates starting January 1st going through the 5th. And then here we have our data. Here we have created some new dates. We're going to use our original dataframe 3 and we're going to do a re-index and add those new dates. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so here was our original data frame and here is our re-index data frame. Basically we just added 2 new dates, the 6th and the 7th, and notice that those are not a number NaN values. Now one thing you might want to do right off the bat is to fill those in with zeros. To do that, we can go to our re-index and we can put in fill value equals 0. Now let's just copy this syntax here and paste it. And you can see where we had those NaNs here, those have been filled in with zeros. Now notice that this date in the original data frame still has NaN values. One way that we can fix that is to use fill NA. Okay, so let's take this out Then, after the last round bracket, let's put in fill NA, and let's fill those NAs with a 0. Let's copy this, paste it, and take a look. Okay, so if you compare this data frame where we had all the NaNs to this data frame, all of those NaNs are filled in with a 0. Next up, let's say that you had some data frames where you had some NaN values, and wherever you saw those values, you just wanted to go ahead and get rid of or drop those columns or rows. So let's go ahead and take a look at data frame 4. Notice that we have 5 columns, A through E, and columns C and D are NaN values. In this case, we just want to go ahead and get rid of those. Now, one way we can do that is to go ahead and use drop NA. Let's go ahead and copy this. Notice that we reference data frame 4, then we use a dot drop NA, and we want the axis 1 for the columns. So when we hit return here, all we should be left with is columns A, B, and E, because we want to drop the columns C and D with the NaN values. Okay, so that looks good. We're good to go. For our next example, instead of dropping the columns, we're going to drop the rows. We're going to use data frame 5. Let's take a look. So we have some NaN values in columns 0 and 2. We just want to go ahead and drop those. So we're going to use this syntax here, data frame 5 dot drop NA, and instead of the 1 axis, we're going to use 0 for the rows. And that should drop this row and this row. And you can see we're left with rows 1, 3, and 4. Those were the rows with no NaN values. Next up, let's say that you want to import a CSV file and there are missing values in that CSV file. Let's go ahead and go to our desktop. Here we have our CSV file. Think of this as a very small data frame. We have columns A, B, and C, but notice here and here we have some missing values. Let's go ahead and copy this variable and take a look. Okay, so here is the data frame equivalent of that CSV file on our desktop. Where we saw those missing values, we have NaNs. Now, let's say for those NaN values, you just want to go ahead and fill those in with 0. One way that you can do that is to go right here after this last round bracket, use a dot, fill NA, 0. Let's go ahead and select that and run it. And let's take a look. And we can see those NaN values have been filled in with 0. Now, last but not least, let's say that you want to begin to plot some of your data. Here we have a data frame. Let's take a look at our data frame 6. We have 2 columns, A and B, and we have a few NaN missing values. Now, one way that you could fill those in is by using Interpolate. Let's go ahead and copy this. And let's take a look at Interpolate. Now, one thing to point out is there are lots of different methods that you can use, and it defaults to the linear. Before we paste that code, let's take a look at those values and how they are filled in. So notice that here we had 1, 2, and where there was an NaN, it put in a 3.4. As we mentioned, it's going to default to the linear method. Here, where we had NaNs, it started out with 0.25, and it put in a 1.5 and a 2.75, and then it moves on to the 4, 12, and 14. Now that we've kind of seen how that Interpolate works and fills in those values, you can see how it might be useful if you want to plot some data. In this case, we're going to use plot, and we're going to use a line chart. Okay? We use the Interpolate to fill in those missing values, and you can see all the lines are filled in. If you did not use the Interpolate, let's see what that would look like. You can see that there are some missing values here. Where the missing values were in the data set, those lines are missing in this chart. Okay? So those are just a few ways that you can begin to work with missing values in your Pandas datasets. There are many more things that you can do to deal with your missing values, and we might go over some of those in a future tutorial. That's all we have for this tutorial. Join us again next time.